Right now, life under the sequester. Has life changed since those budget cuts took hold last Friday? Depends on who you ask. Did President Obama cry wolf on this one? And if so, does that mean he'll lose the budget battle? We'll get the very latest from Washington, D.C. And next, the genesis of a smear campaign. That sex scandal involving Senator Robert Menendez, that may be over now that one of the alleged prostitutes has come forward saying she was paid to lie. We'll have the details on the story that wasn't and the part of the story that remains. And later, meet the millionaires and even a few billionaires. Are self-funded candidates good or bad for our democracy? Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us on this Wednesday evening, March 6th. Well, today was day 5 of life under the sequester. The good news, there is at least some movement aimed at ending the budget standoff. The House today passing a continuing resolution, a bill that would fund the government and stop a full government shutdown for 6 months. But there are differences between what House Republicans and Senate Democrats want that bill to do. The Senate will now push its own version, and if both parties can agree on a deal before March 27th, a shutdown could be averted. Stay tuned. And we've also got both sides talking about the budget and the sequester. Republican House budget guru Paul Ryan telling reporters today he spoke with the president this week, as have 6 other Republicans. No details provided on that conversation. And more talking could be happening right now. The president scheduled to meet 11 Senate Republicans for dinner tonight, if the snow in D.C. permits. And a week from tomorrow, the president scheduled to go to Capitol Hill and, in a rare bipartisan move, meet with the Republican Senate caucus during their policy lunch. He's also going to meet with Democrats and House Republicans at a later date. Now, the president reaching out to the GOP maybe to staunch what seems to be some slippage when it comes to the White House's PR push in the wake of the sequester. Thus far, the long lines, the delays, the cutbacks that the administration warned the sequester would bring haven't really materialized, instead replaced with headlines like the early release of immigration detainees blamed on anticipated sequester cuts, or warnings of massive airport delays and announced air traffic control closures, despite little evidence from travelers of problems at the airport. And now the cancellation of the White House tours, again being blamed on the sequester cuts, despite House Republicans announcing the tours of the Capitol will continue. Now, those optics, cutbacks at the White House and business as usual on the Hill, come amid reports in the conservative media like this article from the Washington Times, suggesting the administration is making sequester cuts look as painful as possible so as to enhance their impact and better make the president's case to the American people. Add that to complaints from some surprising sources that the president hasn't done enough to get a deal done, and you have to wonder if the White House is losing the sequester fight, at least from a PR standpoint.
I think the president, by my lights at least, spent entirely too much time in the last 2 weeks campaigning, in effect, out around the country, lining up that Saturday Night Live parody, all those people who will be affected, when he ought to have been maybe at Camp David and said to Boehner and his team and members of the Republican side on the Senate side, bring the leadership up here. Let's spend 5 days showing the public that we are interested in trying to make a heroic effort to get a deal here.
Joining us now is Sean Spicer. He is the communications director for the Republican National Committee. Sean, thanks for a few minutes. Much of this focus on the budget and budget cuts has been on the deficit and the overall debt. The Simpson-Bowles Commission called for a little more than $4 trillion in cuts. We're actually approaching $4 trillion in cuts already through the Obama administration. What's the magic number? How many cuts are enough? How small do we have to whittle the deficit before we can have both parties on the same page?
That's actually a great question. I think the Simpson-Bowles Commission looked at a ratio of 3-to-1 revenue and spending cuts, and we got over that. Right now, it's actually the White House, to be honest, is getting a pretty good deal. They raised so many taxes in December that right now, if they just agree to the $1.2 trillion that are left, that the commission has recommended, they'd actually end up with a better deal than they would have gotten out of Simpson-Bowles. But to answer your question, I think we have to get to a point where we've got the debt under control. We've got our deficits under control. I mean, we've had the last 4 years where we've had the first $4 trillion plus deficit budgets in our history. And frankly, the markets are reacting. Our credit rating is jeopardized. And so we have to do things that stabilize our country and our fiscal house.
Well, a lot of the instability in the credit rating and in the markets has been due to a lack of security in what Washington is going to do. The markets don't have a sense that Washington is going to get a deal done. Once we reach the point of deficit savings that Simpson-Bowles would have gotten us, Why is that not enough? Why would the paring down of government have to continue?
Well, first, I think we have to get to Simpson-Bowles, and I think the question that you just asked is spot on in the sense that there's a lot of people who say, hey, at the very least, Simpson-Bowles is where we need to start, and we're seeing a tough time for you guys to cut. The biggest problem right now is this, that the spending trajectory is at such a high clip. You know, it's going like this, and everyone keeps saying, well, if we just raise some more revenue, and the equivalent, the analogy that I use is like, you know, you break your leg, you go to the hospital, and they give you a shot of morphine. Well, for you know, maybe an hour or two, you feel really good, but at the end of, you know, a few hours and into the next day, you realize, I got a broken leg still, and I still haven't done anything to fix it. We keep throwing revenue at the problem, saying, okay, well, we'll fix it for this year or for this 6 months. But the problem, really what's going on is Washington's spending it's such an out-of-control pace that until we tame it, I think that there are people who look at us and say, you cannot keep making promises and keep spending at this rate without having a serious plan to tackle it. It's not unlike, you know, any family that at a certain point you max out one credit card, you max out the next, and you say, well, okay, Dad, go get a second job. Mom, get a second job. Well, at a certain point, you can't get any more second or third or fourth jobs because the spending hasn't been gotten under control and you've maxed out all the cards. That's the position our country's in.
But much of that spending, as you go deeper into the 10-year forecast, is due to health care costs and retirement costs. President Obama has said that he's willing to put overhauls to Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare on the table. If that's enough to bring in or rein in those out years in terms of spending, at what point would the GOP be willing to give in and add a little more revenue just to get a deal done and put all of these cliffs and sequesters and all of that behind us?
Right. Well, first, as I mentioned, in December, they ended up getting more additional tax increases in revenue than they would have out of Simpson-Bowles. So, frankly, they're ahead of the game right now as it is. And I think there's a point at which you say, how many times are we going to get fooled by this White House? Second, as I pointed out, revenue's not the problem. You can keep adding more and more revenue, but until you tame the cost curve of some of these out-of-control spending that's going on, you'll never solve the problem. But third is, to your question, if he's willing to put some of these things, he talks about putting things on the table, and the Democrats talk about plans. But talking is not a plan. A plan is something that you can read, that you can introduce in Congress and pass. So they've put talking points out and posted talking points. But talking points are not a plan, and it is not something that the Congressional Budget Office or the Office of Management and Budget or anyone can look at and say, this is what impact this will have on our budget. You cannot score talking points. And so I think that if the president wants to get serious and the White House wants to get serious, you need Senate Democrats and the White House to actually put a plan on paper that you can negotiate from. Because right now, that's all it is a series of talking points.
And finally, there is still talk about a possibility of a grand bargain that got a little play in the Washington Post today. It would be a deal moving on retirement and health programs down the road in exchange for new revenue. Is that something that, to your mind, the GOP, the RNC could sign off on?
We would take I think, frankly, this isn't, I don't think the future of the country in terms of the sustainability of these programs, they're all important, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. We should be reforming them because it's the right thing to do, because they'll be around for the next generation, not as one side wins if we save this program or another. But with respect to more revenue in the tax code, sure, if we are able to broaden the base, close some loopholes, lower the rates for individuals and businesses, which will spur economic growth, bring in more revenue, then we're all for that. But I think if the answer that the White House wants is let's raise taxes and in return we'll do the right thing on entitlement programs, that doesn't sound like something that's in the best interest of the country.
All right, Sean Spicer, Communications Director for the Republican National Committee. Sean, thanks very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.